Hey guys, it's TheFrXion here, Tank12, having to call me, I don't really care. Welcome back to World of Tanks, where today we're going to be taking a quick look at the Tiger 131. This is one of the legendary Tigers that still exists to date, and I think it belongs to the Tank Museum in Bovington, if I'm correct, but let me check the vehicle details real fast. Yeah, it is an item in the Tank Museum in Bovington, and it's one of the few Tigers that actually is still operable. I think the gun maybe doesn't work anymore, or it has been demilitarized, but it can still drive around. And when you're in Bovington and you go look at the Tank Museum, this is one of the pieces that you can actually see, and that they do occasionally take out for a spin. And it's a really cool Tiger. It's a premium tank in this game, and it's one of two tier 6 premium Tigers with the heavy tank number 6 on the other end. Let me just real fast take away the style on this vehicle, because this tank looks very different in. Let me just remove the style. Looks very different from the get-go. It is this green tint that is for the Japanese army, because the heavy tank number 6 was a tank that was actually supposed to be delivered to the Japanese army via submarine, because by that time the German or the Axis, they no longer had any kind of superiority on the sea. They never really had superiority on the sea, but it was really difficult to get them from Germany to Japan. But Japan bought a couple of Tigers, then they were leased back to the Germans, and they fought in the Western Front in 1944, where I think quite a few of them were knocked out. I think in total they got about 5 or 6 tanks, and they never made it to Japan. But because of this very interesting role that they were bought by the Japanese, they actually belonged to the Japanese army. So that's why we have Tiger heavy tank number 6, which is a Japanese Tiger because it belonged to them. And then we have the Tiger 131, which is the Tiger tank that was captured by the British in the Western Front. And yes, it is a Tiger. It is a tank that is at tier 6. It's a heavy. It is a premium, and it will cost you about 5,000 bonds. Today we want to answer the question if the 5,000 bonds are a good investment, or if they are better placed in some other vehicles. Right now we have the 113 BO that is currently going on, but we're not going to be talking about that because I already made a separate video on the vehicle. So let's find the Tiger 131. It's down here, and you have the hydrostat, the IS-2S, or the shielded, the T-34 shielded, the M10 RBFM for the French, and then I think you don't have any more low tier premium tanks. So to be fair, 5,000 bonds, that's only 3,000 bonds of some tier 8 premium tanks, like the T26E5P. I think that thing is 8,000 bonds, and also the AMX M449L, which is a very good tank. Still is only 8,000. So if you think about it, the 5,000 that you have to spend on the Tiger 131, that is quite a hefty price for a tier 6 premium tank. The IS-2 shielded, on the other hand, is something along the lines of 6,000 to 7,000. I don't really recall because I never bought these. I already owned them. So the question is it worth it for you? And I think very quickly you can already answer that question. If you're trying to play this game as a free-to-play player and you need some tier 8 premium tanks, do not waste your 5,000 bonds that are quite difficult to get a hold of on a Tiger 131. Even though the Tiger 131 is a historical vehicle, even though it might be fun, I think it would be a waste of bonds if you do it on this tank. Before we even go into the statistics and characteristics, because it's a tier 5, and getting a tier 8 will get you a lot more for your bonds. And yeah, but that is a complete different story. If you already own all the tanks, you don't want any more premium tier 8s, and you maybe want something that is more unique and maybe historically accurate, like the Tiger 131. This is a tank that has history. This is a vehicle that really fought in World War II and is still an active part of a museum up to this date, and one of the last Tigers that can still be driven around, and I think that is a pretty cool thing to have. So let's talk about the characteristics, because we'll have to get there eventually. So you have a Tiger 131. So just so you know, the heavy tank number 6 and the Tiger 131 have the exact same stats. They didn't change anything because they're the same vehicle and the exact same configuration. It is an 88mm gun, but the short variant instead of the long one with the Tiger 1. And you can see the penetration is only 145mm with AP shells, 220 alpha damage. All of that is not too bad. You have 2056 DPM on this vehicle, so rate of fire for this tier 6 is quite good. Most of the time the lower tier vehicles do have quite nice DPM. Aim time is decent enough. Dispersion isn't too bad. You have 8 degrees of gun depression. You can work certain ridge lines quite nicely. Some of them you can't. The gun traverse speed or turret traverse speed is a bit lacking because it's a heavy tank. Only 21.81 degrees per second, and that is with the right equipment, or with a bit of equipment and crew skills. Other than that, it's not very good. The rate of fire though is quite nice, as you can see with the DPM, 9.35 rounds per minute, and then you obviously have APCR shells, which have 194 millimeters of penetration, so that's an increase by about 50 millimeters. That's going to help you out quite a lot if you have to go up against tier 7 vehicles and tier 8 tanks. This tank does not fare very well against tier 8 tanks. Even tier 7s, it's going to struggle a bit, because it's one of the most basic tank designs that you can have in this game. It's a very big box, very, very easy to penetrate from all the sides. It doesn't have any kind of real protection, especially in this game with the matchmaking and the way that the game works. The Tiger 131 just doesn't really work out in tier 6 and 7 by itself. In tier 5 and maybe some tier 6 matches, you might be able to utilize the armor in a decent kind of way, but other than that, most games it's going to be quite difficult. You have 100 millimeters at the front, 100 at the turret, 80 on the side, 80 at the rear. Generally speaking, this tank is quite nicely armored all around, but if we would have the mods installed, you could just see that it's effective. It's only 100 millimeters, because it's basically, look at that, it's perfectly flat. It's a perfect place to shoot this tank. Just this entire part up here is very easy to go through. The turret is flat as hell. You have a cupola on top, very easy to pen. You have the lower plate, which do have some tracks on it, so there is a bit of an angle going on there. So shooting the lower plate actually is not really the best idea. Shooting the upper plate is a lot easier, and you'll just be able to go through this tank very, very quickly at tier 6 even. So the armor unfortunately doesn't work out very well. What you have to do is you have to learn to angle the Tiger, because if you get a little bit of an angle, the armor at the front might work out better. But the thing is, since in World of Tanks, it's just not so much. There's not really crazy distances that you'll be fighting with this tank or with all the tanks. Yeah, the armor is not going to work out extremely well. Even when you're angling, people will be able to overmatch, and people will be able to still shoot certain weak spots. So it makes it quite a bit difficult to make this tank effective in certain matches where you are going up against other premium or heavy tanks that have some angling on them. You do have 1060 HP, which is quite good for a tier 6 heavy tank in my opinion. I do have improved hardening class 2 on it, just to get a bit more HP out of it. Mobility wise, the Tiger actually isn't too bad. It's with 44 kilometers per hour with the turbocharger class 2, it's quite fast. It just doesn't have the best specific power to weight ratio, and it weighs all the way up to 67 tons. So quite a heavy tank for the size of it. If you compare it to other vehicles, it's quite small if you compare it to the Löwe, but it still weighs about 60 tons. So yeah, quite a heavy vehicle. 31.66 traverse speed, or degrees per second traverse speed. Not too bad. This vehicle does get around decently enough. And spotting wise, concealment wise, there aren't really big surprises. Spotting wise, there are some surprises though. Yeah, concealment wise, there are no surprises, but spotting wise, this tank is actually not too bad. 409 meters with the right skills. and the equipment, this tank has a base view range of 370 meters. For a heavy tank, that is quite good at tier 6. If you add some things on it, if you maybe use like premium consumables and you have the right crew training, you have 409 meters base view range at tier 6. If you're going up against those tier 6, 7 tanks, you actually have more than enough view range to handle quite a few distance engagements and be able to spot certain vehicles that some other tanks might not be able to do. So, you know, view range wise, this tank also isn't too bad. But I'd say, without further ado, let's jump into a game, see what this tank is capable of and whatnot, and then we're going to talk about the idea of picking this up for 5,000 bonds, because in the end, maybe you have a shit ton of bonds, you don't really care, you just want to get some unique vehicles. This could be something for you. But if, you know, if you don't really know if you want to get this tank or not, and you only have about 5 to 6k bonds, there might be a better option out there, or there might be a better strategy to, you know, get the most out of your bonds. But we're going to talk about that in the end of this video. So let's jump into some gameplay and see what this tank is capable of. Unfortunately, the replay feature is bugged once more, probably because of the micro patch that Wargaming have released yesterday. And I don't really like when tanks don't turn their turrets to the correct direction. That really annoys me. So we're just gonna do this live action. So we're gonna be playing this. Hopefully I can show you guys the strengths and the weaknesses of this tank, but it probably just comes down to the biggest weakness of this vehicle, which is the armor. The armor just doesn't really work anymore. Even at tier 6, it just does not work very well. I think you really have to rely on tanks being completely stock, or players not really knowing where to shoot you, to be able to have an effective game in a Tiger, because it's the easiest vehicle to shoot at, because it's very flat, and having, you know, flat tanks usually means, or flat armor usually means, that you'll be able to just go through most of the vehicle if you have more than 100 millimeters of penetration, which quite a few of these tanks have, or about most of these vehicles have about 100 millimeters of penetration. We're just going to try and see if we can actually catch someone off guard over here when they're crossing, but doesn't seem to be the case. So I'm just going to go over to the ridgeline, to the C2 area, because that's where our tank can be effective, because we have 8 degrees of gun depression. So having a bit of armor up here, especially the hit points, should give us a bit of an advantage. We do have quite a few medium tanks camping our base, sniping, and we are going to have quite a few tanks coming in towards us, so we'll have to see that we can find the perfect balance for us. We have a T50-2. I don't really know what he's trying to do here, but he's not going to be very effective here. And I hope I can angle our armor just a little bit, so that we can at least bounce a couple of shots. So we have the Cheeto right over there. Do not want to drive out too much. I know that the T105, T150 is right over there. We track the Cheeto, and oh, the KV2 could absolutely destroy his life if he stays up there. And yes, that just happened. The KV2 just hit him for actually just 233, so he didn't manage to penetrate the Cheeto, which is quite fascinating, because the Cheeto just doesn't have a lot of armor. That thing is basically barren at the front. So this is what you want to have when you're playing the Tiger 131. We have vehicles that we can easily penetrate. We have rate of fire. We have the DPM that we need. And we do have a bit of support, so that we can, you know, have a little bit of assistance in case that somebody is shooting at us, that we have a shared HP pool, so we're not the only target. The gun, as always, I still think that this stock gun is a lot of fun, even though it is just a stock 88mm gun, but since it's just a tier 6 tank, and not a tier 7, I think it's completely fine. And at tier 6, when you're playing at tier 6, there are some very unreasonable plays that do happen, from certain players because maybe they do not have enough experience or they just don't really care. That's all fine, and you know, you can have a lot more impact on the game itself when you have a bit of experience. You can see that this VK just suicided in there. That didn't really work out for him or his team, and now they are at a numeric disadvantage because somebody couldn't wait for the right moment. I don't want to be spamming gold when I'm playing this tank, so I am trying to find the weak spots of the vehicles. Usually it does work. We have a T50-2 right behind us, and it takes a while to get the turret around, but you can see that yeah, the DPM on the Tiger, even on the tier 6 Tiger, is still very nice. It's a lot of fun to shoot things when you can shoot them. It's just not a lot of fun when you're going up against tier 7 tanks, and especially tier 8 vehicles, because there the armor doesn't give you any kind of protection. I just have the feeling that certain Soviet tanks, like the T-150, the KV-1, they just do not have that kind of problem because the armor layout is completely different. It's not as flat. Obviously they have flat spots, but they're not as flat as other vehicles. And I think other tanks, newer tanks that Wargaming have designed themselves, they have a lot more flat, like a lot more angles to them, no more as many flat surfaces as, you know, the original German tanks had, because they are not just a fictional you know, vehicle, but they are actually historically accurate. So obviously that was a time when the tank design was completely different, and the philosophy behind it was just have as much armor as you can. Doesn't matter, the angling is not too important, because the anti-tank guns that you faced at that time was max maybe 76 millimeters, and then it was like short barrel 76 millimeter that wasn't able to really go through tanks very effectively, and maybe even fired mainly high explosive shells. So when the Soviets started adding bigger guns with more penetration, better shell velocity and everything, you know, like the SU-100 with the 100mm gun, or the T-34-85 with the 85mm gun, that all of a sudden kind of changed the balance of yeah, of the fight, because definitely all of a sudden the Tiger no longer had this armor that was basically impenetrable, but it was very easy to go through. That's why they changed it to the Tiger 2, and they added the slopes, and the Tiger 2 is extremely angled if you look at it from the front. So that's a very different kind of philosophy. That's because of the experience that they have garnered with the fight in the Eastern Front. So yeah, speaking about that, the Tiger 131 is definitely a cool tank because it has history behind it. That is basically, for me, that is the main reason why I got this tank, because it's a historical Tiger tank. It has history, it has meaning, and it's not like any other tier 7 or 8 premium tank that we have never seen in our lives before. This is actually a vehicle that has history behind it, and that makes it even more cool when you play it. It's just not a very good tank in terms of being competitive with other vehicles. Even at tier 6 it does have its limitations. If you have players that know a bit about the armor, that know how to take on the Tiger 131, they will be able to finish you off quite quickly. But you could see, you can also have good games in the Tiger 131, but it's most of the time limited to tier 6 matches or below that, because at tier 7, when all of a sudden you have vehicles that are running around at tier 7 with 170 millimeters of penetration as a base pen, you have 100 that is 76 millimeters of pen more to go through your armor, and you'll not have as much fun with the Tiger 131 as you had with the lower tier vehicles. Now obviously I know it's not just a problem of the Tiger 131, that is basically matchmaking with tanks that is a bit shit, but in the end, spending 5,000 bonds for a Tiger tank that is historical and that is definitely a collector's item, I think it's too much. It's too much bonds, bonds that you need for equipment, bonds that you need for tier 8 premium tanks or even tier 10 tanks that are kind of special. I would much rather save up the bonds, get a tier 8 if you're trying to get a good credit making machine, or I would save it for a tier 10 if you want to have a competitive vehicle, and not just the Tiger 131 that is a historical tank, but also just doesn't really have the power anymore that the Tiger maybe once had in 1942, but in 1944 just didn't really have any more because, yeah, technological advances in war, these advances move very, very quickly. You have to adapt. You have to be more efficient than the other your opponent because you want to kill them faster than you're getting killed by them. So that's basically the concept of war, and how that works. Yeah, so I can't really say with good heart that the Tiger 131 is a good investment. For tank collectors, yes, you'll probably pick it up or you already own it. But if you are not a tank collector and you're a free-to-play player, you have better places to spend your bonds in. For example, I can already tell you guys several vehicles that would be a better investment. Let's go into the bond shop real fast. You have the Amex M449L, that is already a better investment. The IS-6B or the IS-6 is a better investment because it has preferential matchmaking. The maybe not the Pat in Korea. The T34-3 would be a better investment. The T26E5 would be a better investment. The T103 would be a better investment. The Alpine Tiger would be a better investment. Even the Mutz, even though the Mutz isn't extremely powerful, I think all of these would be better investments. Even the IS-2 Shielded, which is 7,000. If you have 7,000, just go for the tier 8 because that's only 1,000 more bonds that you have to spend. So generally speaking, 5,000 bonds for a tier 6 tank is just way too expensive. And I would like to see Wargaming actually rethink the price because it's way too expensive, and I don't think a lot of players will be picking this one up. I'd much rather kind of skip this unless you have the bonds to waste. Other than that, there are better options out there. And I hope I could give you a little bit of idea what the Tiger 131 is all about. And I see you guys on the next video. Until then, have a good one.